Over the years, I have visited over 60 parks in the UK, Europe, and the USA, and planning a trip can get complicated very quickly. So, in this video, I'm going to share with you all the tools that I use to find flights, find accommodation, and what to do when you are there. And make sure you stick around for the end, because there's one mistake that many people make that could result in you not even leaving the airport. Right, obviously everybody's trip will be different, right? We all live in different places and we're all visiting different parks. So you need to know how to get specifically from where you are to where you want to be. And there's one website that can come in handy to do that, and that is roamtorio.com. And basically you just put in where you're starting from and where you're trying to get to, and it will do all the clever stuff to figure out the different routes you can take. Now it'll include flights, it'll include trains, it'll include driving, it'll include taxis, everything, buses, the whole 9 yards. So it is fantastic to give you the different options, including what alternative airports you could fly to, etc. When it comes to flights, I'm sure most of you are aware of Skyscanner, but in case you aren't, it is a fantastic tool for finding these flights, because you basically just say, I'm flying from this airport to this airport, and you can either give it specific dates, or you can just say, in this month, and it'll tell you when the cheaper days are to fly, which can be great for planning your trips if you haven't yet got that time off work. And the one thing to bear in mind as well is sometimes there are multiple different airports to fly into. So for example, when I've been to Efteling, everyone's always saying fly into Eindhoven. Now I've done that, but for me in Edinburgh, sometimes seasonally they don't fly to that airport, or the times aren't great, etc. So I have in the past flown to Amsterdam and then hired a car. Similarly, when it comes to parks like Phantasialand, again, the normal route to go is to Cologne, but I have, again, had problems getting the right flight times from where I am, and I've ended up going to Dusseldorf, again, hiring a car. So don't be afraid to look around at alternatives, because sometimes that can either save you money or make the flight times better in terms of when you arrive at the parks. And if you are doing trains, then you can use trainline.com. Now, when I first started this, I assumed that was just a UK train website. It isn't, it covers Europe as well. I have used it, for example, when travelling to Disneyland Paris to get a train from Charles de Gaulle to the park. So that is another fantastic tool that you can use if you are getting a train. One thing to bear in mind, and I have fallen foul of this myself, is you can sometimes think, oh, I can get a really early flight or an early train or whatever it is, and I'll get to the park. I'll travel the same day that I'm visiting the park. And that can sometimes work. If things are a little bit tight, then, if your flight is delayed, suddenly you've lost a day in the park. So you've paid for a ticket. Sometimes it's better to travel the day ahead, and then you've got a full day in the park, relaxed, chilling out, and you're not stressing about getting off that flight, get your car, getting a bus, getting a train, whatever it is, to get you to the park for opening time or close thereafter. So don't be afraid to travel out the night before, but bear in mind, if you do that, you're obviously going to need an extra day's accommodation. Right, so you've managed to get to the right country. The next thing is, how do you get from the airport, assuming that that is your mode of transport, to the park? This is the thing. This is where there are a multitude of different options, and sometimes everyone has a different opinion. For me, I quite like to get a car. Just hire a car and drive. It's not the cheapest option by any stretch of the imagination, but it does give you that flexibility and freedom, and then you're not kind of at the mercy of public transport. To be fair, public transport, typically in Europe, is fantastic, and it is significantly cheaper. So if you are on a budget, definitely consider looking at those buses, those trains, etc., to get you from A to B. As I say, the one thing with that is then you are kind of at the mercy of public transport the whole time. So, if you just need to nip down to the shops, for example, well, you don't have a car to do so, so you're either walking or you're getting an Uber or whatever it is. Speaking of Ubers, that is another option that I have used in the past, where maybe I don't want to hire a car for the day, I just want to get straight to the park, and this will tie into your accommodation, which we'll get to next, depending on where you are staying. One thing to note, not everywhere allows Uber. So I have travelled to some places like Salou for Portaventura. Uber isn't a thing. There are, of course, local taxis. If Uber is an option, you can actually check it from home, so you can get an idea of how much it's going to cost before you get there. Obviously, with Uber, it is kind of surge pricing, so it's not a flat fee. And obviously, if there's like higher demand or less cabs available, prices can vary, but it does give you a ballpark. But you can change the from and to destination and get a sort of rough idea how much that would cost, and work out if a taxi is an option for you, or if it is cheaper to hire that car. Now, another thing you need to bear in mind when you are hiring that car is insurance. It's one of those things that I have been stung in the past where I took a car back, I think it was in Schiphol. I returned the car, the guy checked it over, and then I signed it and I walked away. Never said anything to me. And then an hour later, I get an email saying, here's a €400 charge for a missing alloy. I'm not being funny, but if it was missing an alloy, it'd be missing a blooming tyre as well. So I fought that one and I managed to get the money back. But just bear in mind that sometimes it's worth the effort to get that insurance. One caveat with that though is you can get cheaper car hire through third-party sites. So the airlines will do it, and there are kind of brokers, etc. If they offer you insurance though, there is a catch with that insurance, and that is that whilst it will pay out, you will likely have to pay the fee yourself for the repairs and then claim the insurance back. Whereas if you get the insurance direct from that car hire company, they just take care of it. So sometimes you think you're saving some money by going through this third party, and all being well, you probably will, but if you do have that accident and you need that insurance, you're going to be out of pocket temporarily whilst you then claim that back. So just bear that in mind when you're hiring a car. Right, the other thing with hiring a car is obviously you then need to park it at the parks. And there are some parks where parking is free, it's the same in the UK. There are some parks where you have to pay. And, you know, that can add up as well. If you're visiting a park 2 or 3 times, then you have to pay the parking 2 or 3 times. Obviously, if you are using public transport, etc., or if you're within walking distance of the park, you're not going to have to pay that. So just bear that in mind that when you have a car, you could end up racking up fees when you're at the parks. And the last thing to consider when it comes to cars is, of course, whether you want a manual or an automatic. Now, I've driven both here in the UK, I've driven both internationally. I do personally find it a little strange having a manual gear stick in my right hand, so I tend to go for an automatic nowadays. Of course, if you are traveling to the US, good luck getting a manual. It almost will not happen, but just bear that in mind. And the other thing, this probably sounds really, really obvious, but this guy's forgot it. Take your driving license with you. Yeah, I left mine once, and thankfully Carly had hers, so she took over the driving. Right, so you've landed in the country, you've managed to get out the airport, and then you need to go to somewhere to stay, unless it's a day trip, of course. So that comes to accommodation. Now, there are a ridiculous number of options typically. I always start by looking at what the on-site accommodation offerings are. Don't always use them, but I like to start there because it gives you a feel for what the sort of costs could be. There is the convenience of staying on site. You obviously don't then need to worry about that parking cost because you're already there. Or if you've not taken a car, once you've got public transport or an Uber to the park, you're sorted because you're on site. You sometimes get fast pass. So when I stayed at Phantasialand, you get some fast passes included when I've done the Charles Lindbergh and when I did Lingbao. You sometimes get early entry to the park as well, which is fantastic. That can help if it's a busier time of year. So, you know, sometimes that is worth doing. And I have, when I stayed in Efteling with the full family, I stayed on site. When I went to do it with Carly, the only options they had was family rooms, and they were very, very expensive for just 2 people. So in that case, I then sort of look elsewhere, and the obvious place to start is booking.com. And if you use booking.com regularly, you do build up kind of like genius levels, and then you will get some discounts. For example, when I went to Europa Park last year, I stayed in a kind of guest house. It was 10 minutes away, really easy to walk to, and it was massive. Like each one of these guest houses was like multiple floors. It could accommodate up to like 8 people. So that was fantastic. I've also done, when I went to Liseberg, stayed in a hotel that was like a 15-minute walk from the park. So, you know, there are plenty of options when it comes to the accommodation. Now, one thing to bear in mind when you're doing this, though, is tourist tax. You know, it's becoming a thing everywhere. You know, depending on where you are in the UK, it may already exist. They're talking about it here in Edinburgh. It's kind of unavoidable, but typically it's separate to the booking cost. So even if you've paid for it online, you will almost certainly have to pay that tourist tax in person when you get there. Now, if you're in a hotel, that's fine because they will either take cash or card. Again, that example of Europa Park, I was in a guest house where it was one of those kind of lock boxes, and I never saw a human the whole time. There was a form for me to fill out and a little pouch for me to put coins in. I don't carry cash, so I had to go to an ATM to get some cash to then put the tourist tax into that little pouch. So just bear that in mind. It's typically not expensive. You're talking like €1 or €2 per night often. You know, so unless you're there for a long time, it's not expensive. Sometimes it does vary with the number of people as well. That will not be included when you pay for your accommodation online. Another thing you want to do when you're checking out that accommodation is kind of go on a map, whether you're on booking.com or just on Google Maps, etc., and just see what's in the area, right? Because sometimes these accommodation options are great, except they're in the middle of nowhere. And that comes back to depending on your mode of transport. If you're in the middle of nowhere and you've got a car, fine, drive to a supermarket, drive to a restaurant, whatever. But again, if you are not, you're kind of stuck wherever you are. So it's worth checking around the surrounding area to see if there are amenities that will make your life a little easier whilst you're over there. Right, the next thing is park tickets. And if you are in Europe or the UK, I'd strongly recommend you just go straight to that park's website and buy the tickets direct from them. I know if you're traveling to Florida, for example, there are third-party vendors who can offer you some discounts. So that is one to consider. I've not found the same thing when I'm traveling inside Europe. Now, some of the parks don't allow you to buy a ticket on the day. There are not very many of these, but there are some where you literally have to have purchased a ticket online in advance to arrive. And let's be fair, it's the same here in the UK, that even if you do have the option to buy on the day, you probably don't want to because it can be more expensive. Another thing to consider as well is you might actually get free entry into some of these parks depending on what season passes you have. For example, I've got a Blackpool Pleasure Beach season pass, and that gives me 1 day entry to 7 parks across Europe, and all of those parks are involved in that kind of scheme. So if you've got a Europa Park one that returns, you can use that for free in the same parks, etc. So you may potentially have access to at least 1 day for free in these parks when you're traveling. Another thing to consider is depends on the length of your trip, but sometimes it might actually be cheaper to buy that season pass whilst you're there. If you're planning on visiting the park for 3 days or more, check out the cost of a season pass, because sometimes it is as expensive to buy individual tickets as it is to buy that season pass. You may not use it, but you also could save some money even for that short trip. Now, the other kind of ticket type that you might want to look at, and I know this is a bone of contention for many people, is FastPass. I've said it before, when I'm traveling, if I'm going to visit a park for a short period of time and I don't know when I'm going to return, I typically want to guarantee I get on as much as possible. So I have purchased FastPass in the past, and it varies wildly, right? Some of them are reasonably priced, some of them are ridiculously expensive. Some of them don't even exist. So if you go to Efteling or Europa Park, they don't do FastPass, but some of the parks do have a virtual queuing system. So the other thing to make sure you do before you leave is install the park's app on your mobile device. I know a lot of people don't like to be on their phone all the time when they're there, but it can be convenient. It's got the map in it. Most of them will tell you the queue times. Virtual queues, if they exist, will be through that application, etc. So make sure you do that whilst you're here before you travel. So that begs the question of when should you travel? Assuming that you've got the option to kind of pick and choose, what I'd strongly recommend is that you look for crowd calendars. Type in crowd calendar and the park that you're looking for into Google, and you will often find multiple options. Now, they are, of course, a guide. Nobody knows for sure how busy a park will be on a certain day, but they tend to look at historical data over the last few years and kind of average out, this is usually a quiet weekend, this is a busy weekend, etc. Some of this, the parks actually have it on their own site. So Efteling, I believe, has it. Energylandia has it, although Energylandia's, last time I checked it, said every day was quiet, which is clearly not true. So check out those crowd calendars. Obviously, the usual rules apply. Internationally, the school holidays all vary, so bear that in mind that, for example, I did Phantasialand in the Scottish October break. It wasn't the German October break, so it was quiet, which was perfect. But just, if you can go on a weekday when schools are in term, then it's typically going to be the quieter period. Now, obviously, there are a number of parks that, like the UK, are kind of not 365 parks. They have their kind of winter maintenance, they're closed, etc. And you can obviously check their availability on their website. There are some parks, though, that are 365. Certainly internationally, if you go to like America, Disneyland Paris, for example, Efteling, and a few others, the one thing with 365 parks is that they do need to do ride maintenance. So whilst we'll have the parks closed for 3 months and everything gets its maintenance, if it's open all year round, then they have to kind of chop and change and take rides out. It's highly unlikely you're going to have planned maintenance in the summer months, but you could have it in the kind of winter months, and just bear that in mind. You should be able to see ride availability on their website and planned maintenance, etc. Of course, as is always the case in any park, you may turn up with no planned maintenance and find a ride is out of action. But just bear that in mind as well, that if you are going in the quieter times of the year, try and find out what rides might not be open when you get there. And speaking of rides that might not be open, there is obviously that seasonality in terms of you may want to visit at Christmas, you may want to visit at Halloween, etc. I know, for example, Liseberg, their ride lineup changes throughout the year, because at Halloween when I visited and at Christmas, their giant drop tower is used as kind of like a Christmas tree. So yeah, some of their rides are only open in the summer. So it's not the winter maintenance per se, it's just that their availability changes throughout the year. And again, you'll see that on their website before you go. Another thing you obviously need to consider is eating whilst you are there. Now, from what I've seen, a lot of the parks will tell you what food offerings they have on their website, and you may even get a menu. You very rarely get the prices on their website though, so it's a little bit of kind of hit and miss as to when you turn up finding out the price. You can of course Google it and try and find out. The other thing to bear in mind is that most parks will allow you to take food in, but some do not. So obviously, if you can take your own food, you can save a fortune, assuming of course that you can get to a supermarket or whatever to kind of make up sandwiches and whatever else you want to do. The other thing I've found is that a lot of parks don't have a brilliant offering for breakfast in the morning, which might make some sense because when you get there, you might not want to eat straight away. You might want to go straight on a ride. You might want to kind of eat in your hotel or grab a McDonald's or whatever on the route, because when you get to the park, some of them have options. They tend to be limited though. Right, some random tips for you then. The first one is when it comes to paying in a foreign currency. Now, you will quite often see on the chip and pin machine that it says, do you want to pay in your currency or the local currency? If you're ever asked that question, strongly recommend always choosing the local currency, not your own currency, because you tend to get a much better exchange rate when you do that. In terms of fees as well, that's the other thing, that some banks will charge you fees every time you use your card, like a currency conversion. But there are ways around that, things like Revolut or Post Office Card, where you can pre-top it up with certain currencies, and some banks don't charge fees as well. So if you're not sure, check with your bank. But certainly one of the things that I've used in the past is that Post Office Card, because I can put so many euros on it or so many dollars on it or whatever it is, and you can move the money around, so it's totally fine. So another one to consider when it comes to cash. Right, I'm probably not the only person here, but when I travel, I have a lot of stuff that needs charged. I've got the cameras, I've got my phones, I've got laptops, if our kids are with me, I've got iPads, etc. Obviously, unless you're traveling within your own country, there's a high probability that the plug will not work in your destination. Now, you could get tons and tons of adapters for all the things you need to plug in. But personally, I just take kind of 4-way block or a 5-way block, whatever I've got, with multiple UK plugs on it, and just put one adapter on the end, and then plug that in, and then all my other stuff can slot in. Saves you buying lots of adapters. Another thing you're probably going to use when you're abroad is that mobile phone. Now, post-Brexit, not many networks allow free roaming anymore. There are still a couple that do this, but the majority of them will charge you a fee to use your free at-home service. You can buy some sort of data packages before you go, which might be cheaper. I have in the past, when I've travelled to the US, I have bought a pay-as-you-go SIM with X amount of gigabytes of data on it. Does mean I've got a temporary number when I'm there, which isn't ideal, but it also means I'm not racking up massive charges. Although recently, when I've done this, most modern iPhones and Android phones support an eSIM. And so in that case, I have used an eSIM for data, and I've still got my main phone number for texts and phone calls. So, because the last thing you want to do is land and get all these charges every day, £2, £5, whatever it is, just to use your free allowance. Right, this last one is an absolute doozy, and it catches people out all the time. My daughter works for an airline, and she is regularly turning people away from getting on flights for this one mistake. If you're in the UK and you have one of the older red passports, they may not be valid. Now, I'm sure you know, a typical UK adult passport is valid for 10 years and a child's passport is valid for 5 years. Now, with the new blue ones, that's totally fine, but with the older red ones, if you renewed it early, then they would add on a little bit of time. What that means is the expiry date on your passport may not be the actual expiry date, because it can only be valid for 10 years. So if you were given 10 years and a month, well, that last month is actually not valid. So basically take a look at your issue date, add 10 years, and that is the actual expiry date of your red passport. The other thing to bear in mind is, depending on where you're traveling to, in the US you need several months, I think it's about 6 on your passport. In Europe, now post-Brexit, most of the time you need 3 months, depends on the country you're traveling to. So you can't ride that passport right the way up to the end. And certainly if it is one of those red ones, double check that date, because my daughter unfortunately has to turn people away from flights every day for this mistake. Right, so there you go. There is a lot of information, tools, tips and tricks for your next trip. And I'd love to know yours as well, because I'm sure you've got some tips that I haven't shared. Let's get them in the comments down below to help other people. If you've enjoyed this one, make sure you hit that like button, and please do subscribe. As always, I've been Chris, you've been watching Coaster Dad, and I'll see you in the next one. Adios. Right, the first tool so I have used many different tools to get there, and once I am there, that's no, that's not what I was saying. Over the years, I have visited over 60 parks in the UK, Europe, and the USA, and planning a trip can get quite complicated. To get from Charles de Gaulle to almost impossible. You will definitely be driving a manual. But I've also stayed off-site to save some money. I don't know where I'm going with that. I had a good example. Lost it. Buy the tickets directly from the words. One thing to bear in mind, just bear that 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 in mind. Another thing you need to bear in mind, just bear in mind, so just bear that in mind as well, just bear that in mind. The other thing to bear in mind as well, but just bear that in mind. One thing to bear in mind, but just bear that in mind, but just bear that in mind, so bear that in mind, so bear that in mind, just bear that in mind, just bear that in mind as well, bear that in mind. The other thing to bear in mind, just bear that in mind, so bear that one in mind, so bear that in mind, just bear that in mind. The other thing to bear in mind is